Hey, my name is Bernardea Gilbert, and this is my near-death experience due to allergic reaction. It must be around 9 p.m. I know my heart is in auricular fibrillation and has been for the last 2 hours, as I have learned to recognize the uneven heartbeats. After years spent going through the rounds of doctors who diagnosed only nervous symptoms, I have been having medical treatment of my arrhythmia for the last 4 years. The eminent cardiologist who prescribes my treatment cannot seem to understand that it is not working. "You've never been very keen," he retorted the previous day, after I told him about my discomfort when I took cortisone. I am exhausted, nearly passing out, when I ask my husband to take me to the hospital emergency room where my cardiologist practices. The intern, seeing me for the first time, confirms the diagnosis. As I expect to go home when the electrocardiogram is done, I ask him to pass the result to my cardiologist tomorrow, as he is not there today. I hope that when he sees it, he will realize that, if I am lacking enthusiasm, maybe there's a good reason for it. After the electrocardiogram, the intern refuses to discharge me. He insists on getting me into an emergency room cubicle at the end of the corridor. They are so busy. A drip is put in place, and I tell myself that I will be out of the hospital in an hour or two. The cortisone slowly infuses my veins. Suddenly I feel a glacial cold gradually surrounding my heart region. I don't say anything to Bernard, who is at my side. I think it will pass. I don't want to worry him, but it doesn't pass. I feel worse and worse. I'm going to lose consciousness. My body twists this way and that, seeking a comfortable position. My breathing becomes more difficult. I make a hand signal to Bernard to tell him I am not good. I see him rush out of the cubicle to seek help. Now I'm all alone. My perception is confused. I would like to quickly lose consciousness and leave this intermediary and very painful state, which in theory comes just before unconsciousness. But oblivion does not come. However much I summon my remaining strength to call it to me, I remain stuck in this no man's land, which is both dark and light, where the air reaches my lungs with greater and greater difficulty. Then suddenly, it's as if a loud popping has disconnected my systems of circulation of air and blood. Everything stops. I have no more air. I'm suffocating. I can't move at all. I am right at the other end of the corridor from the nurse's station. After an interminable moment, I have a broken perception of the presence of 2 women in white, and Bernard, who is saying to them, "She can't respond to you. She can't breathe." One of them turns to him and retorts, "We must ask you to leave, sir." I'm in a panic. He is the only one who seems to understand what is happening, and he has to leave. The light becomes more definite, but the shape of the silhouettes more vague. I would like to shout, to struggle. I lose consciousness intermittently, I believe. It must be so, as Bernard later on will explain that the 2 nurses spoke to me, asking me to breathe. Then one of them asked the other, "Quick, go and get the doctor." Of all that I have no memory. Then I again become aware of the shadows. I see a doctor leaning over me. "Can you hear me, madam? Madam?" I would like to call out to him that I can't breathe anymore, that I'm dying. None of my muscles responds. I can't even budge my little finger, nor make any sound. In intense distress, I feel crazy. I can't even tell the doctor how I feel. About the nightmare I am living through. So how can I make myself understood? In the background I can see a young doctor, in a yellow ochre light. He takes off his jacket and puts it down. He is observing the scene from a distance, impassively. The intern is busying himself, the nurses too, but my consciousness changes and I can't say exactly what is going on. I understand that this new doctor is just taking up his shift, and has not yet had time to put on his white coat. Suddenly he looks at me with a dazzling, childlike smile, his eyes opened wide in astonishment, as if he has just discovered something unique or rare, and he blurts out, "Cortisone allergy?" His almost triumphant tone draws the intern's response. "But she's already been taking it." At this point, I thought of my daughter. She was barely 5 years old at the time, and we were in front of our garage, at the side of the road waiting for a van to pass by. But a cat unfortunately jumped out just at that moment. The wheel of the van literally made the little animal explode. Not at all overcome, she looked carefully at the little bloody mess, and then she cried out, "Wow! I never saw a cat run over before." I remember thinking in the emergency room cubicle that the look on the doctor's face and that on my daughter's face were alike. It hit me like a wounding blow. The lack of compassion. For this doctor, I was just an interesting case. The lack of air was dreadful. I said to myself, even condemned prisoners are sedated. I did not think I deserved a death like this. Just when my whole body was paralyzed, I told myself that my brain continued to function, as there was enough oxygen for thinking, but no longer enough to work my muscles. When asphyxia reached the brain, it would be the point of no return. I had to rationalize because that helped me to accept my death. The next stage would be the progressive extinction of perceptions, then finally the nothingness we are familiar with when we undergo a general anesthetic. I would never have thought that death would make me so afraid. As far back as I can remember, the desire for death has always lived inside me. I don't know at what point I swung into another dimension. It was very violent and sudden, to the extent that nothing would be the same again. I told myself that even if I did not die, I would be in a disabled condition. I clearly saw my heart contracting, twisting, and becoming fixed. This perception of the heart is the most difficult to describe. It was my heart, both myself, my whole being, and part of myself. It was as if I had knowledge of every cell in my body, with all the colors of an unknown universe. I was terrified by this place, is the only way I can express it. I seemed to be all alone on another planet. No one had ever taught me about this. I was the observer of my body, which had become both more than real and unnecessary at the same time. A lightning-quick series of thoughts came to me, not least that I had lived about 50 years next to my own body, and that seemed impossible. I could see the medical team working on my body, but I could not perceive it as a being who thinks and suffers. I felt myself slowly abandoned by human beings, and then by life. So I swore to myself that if I got out of it alive, if I found myself faced with someone's inert body, I would speak to them anyway, give them my hand, tell them they are not alone, to keep on trusting. They were in the throes of an emergency, which I understand, but my God, how I missed a hand in mine, a little comforting phrase, or even just a look. Leaving life in these conditions is, I believe, was more difficult than putting up with physical distress. And then everything became more peaceful, the light softer. I no longer seemed to be short of oxygen. Fear took off and left me. I felt myself floating. Everything seemed so light, so calm. My last thought, in this state of well-being, in an atmosphere of somber gold, which seems to me as close to a description in familiar words as possible, but which is not the reality, was, "My name is Marie. I was born on August 30th, 1957, and I am dying in 4, 3, 2. The gaps between the numbers got longer and longer, and then I felt myself slowly sucked out through the right side of my skull. I was wrapped in a sort of infinitely gentle and beautiful light. I was so light, in a feeling of fulfillment such as I had never felt before, a complete letting go. I could see, while remaining detached from it, the scene unfolding inside the cubicle. One of the nurses took out my drip and said to the other one, "Dopamine." I felt so good. Suddenly, with a shock, I was back to the examining table, feeling very strongly nauseated. I came to with difficulty, like a fish out of water. I was gasping for air. It entered my dormant lungs in a jolting way. Then in chopped-up sounds I managed to bring out, "I'm going to be sick." A hand passed me a kidney dish. I was lifted up, and then was sick. Between each retching, I was gasping for air. I felt movement return to me, painfully, but bringing life back with it. I squeezed the nurse's forearm as if to crush it, with unheard-of strength. To get my machinery going again, they gave me the maximum dosage of oxygen. I know I had a brush with death. I hadn't had the time to reflect on the date. November 5th, 2005. The date when my life should have ended. I resent the dopamine, which revived me. I had paid such a dear price for my heaven in the interminable minutes of suffering. Several days of anguish followed, in fear of taking in nourishment or medicines, which would bring back the allergic reaction. So great was the ordeal prior to death, the agony which preceded the short moment of nirvana. For some days I was very sensitive to smells and loud noises. If Bernard just went into the garage, I would get a full-on odor of gasoline. At the hospital, it was the odors of urine and sweat. I could hear the sounds through the partitions. Then this all faded away bit by bit. Later, the experience I had up there before reluctantly returning to my body came back to me. I was told, in a telepathic way, You cannot die, and you haven't yet seen this street. And I was teleported above a great bridge. My perception of colors and the wonder of the world was increased. I was opposite a little street going up past a restaurant called Rule. It is true that I did not know this street. With hindsight, I was sorry I didn't share my experience with the hospital doctor, not with my cardiologist, who just said, next day, if the treatment doesn't work in 2 weeks, we'll fit you with a pacemaker. But with the one who had looked on me as a rare case, rather than as a still living person. I left hospital the same day, with a new treatment, without being able to share anything at all, not knowing what to do about what I had experienced. Being silent for a long time about it led to my condition being treated as a psychiatric one, diagnosed as mental confusion. Watch this video next about a woman who had exceptional near-death experience due to ruptured fallopian tube and internal bleeding.